second. Welcome to the Sheffield Sunday As Bill Sees It's meeting. This is a main share meeting, and today it is with great pleasure and much gratitude that we welcome John C. from the UK, who's kindly come to share for us for about 40 minutes today, after which we'll open up for general sharing, or if you'd like to ask a question. So thank you so much, John. It's wonderful to have you here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sammy, and thank you, Mary, for that reading. I love it when you read, because you could read the worst weather forecast and it would still sound great to me. You know, you've got such a delivery and a peaceful, beautiful way of carrying the message. So, good afternoon, and here I am as a bit of a Christmas or a post-Christmas surprise, because I'm a substitute. And I was driving home just yesterday, and the phone was going, and it was Young, and he said to me, "Look, you know, I'm finding it difficult to get in touch with Marty. You know, at the 11th hour, if he doesn't show, would you be a willing stand-in?" And you know, every ounce of my being wanted to say something other than the thing that came out of my mouth. And the thing that actually came out of my mouth was, "Of course I will, Young. You know, of course I will." Because, and I'm thinking, did I really say that? Because, normally you'll see me in this square, and it is quite convenient because it's comfortable for me. I can hide behind the screen share. I can hide behind this thing. I can be of my little bit of service. I can partake and enjoy what everybody's got to say. But, you know, then I can sort of drift back inside underneath my rock again and just hide away. And that's not what it's all about, you know, and, you know, if nothing else, I've learned through the process of these 12 steps that, you know, when I'm asked to do service, then there has got to be some really good excuse for it not to happen. So you find me, and, you know, if you've got a resentment list, I suggest you sharpen your pencil, because you might want to add me to it. And furthermore, Young knows me. We work with each other. We rub shoulders with each other during the course of a normal week, you know, in treatment. And he knows what the kind of message I generally carry. So he knows more or less the kind of presentation I will make to you today. So, you know, you might want to add him to the list as well, you know, and we'll go from there. There's a reason why I kind of chose the reading today, because and I'll qualify that as I move down the story to a little bit. But as with normal procedure, I'll start by just introducing myself. My name's John, as I say. I'm a recovering alcoholic and recovered alcoholic by the grace of God. And my sobriety date is the 14th of February 2023. You know, that's St. Valentine's Day. And I can assure you it's about the only romantic thing you're going to hear during the course of this meeting. And it doesn't require a great sort of command of mathematics to realize that that's only quite recent. You know, 3 years ago to this very day, this particular Christmas, 3 years ago would be the last Christmas I was taking a drink. And I was very much in the throes of the mess and the disease 3 years ago. So I'm quite recent, you know. I'm kind of a new kid on the block. However, I will tell you that I'll share this as well. In 2 days' time, on Tuesday, I will attain the age of 71 years old. And you know, I'm not saying that for any other reason, just to emphasize the fact that not only am I a new kid on the block, it took me a very, very long time to get some kind of message whatsoever. So when I dragged myself into any chance of sobriety, I came in with a long-standing habit of drinking, having my own way, having my own opinions. I was always right. As with all stories, I expect. There were plenty of people. There were no shortage of people telling me where I was going wrong, how I was ruining people's lives, how I was doing this and that and the other. And in answer to all that, and again, my story is no different to anybody else's, I would make more of a recluse of myself, and basically I cut myself off completely from society. A few things, yeah. I was born 1954. If a child, I've heard of all sorts of things. I've kind of pored over the coals of this illness, wondering, how did it come about? Because nothing in my upbringing would suggest anything other than privilege. I was, if a child was able and capable of picking its own family, its own parents, I would pick the parents that I had. I would pick the very family I had. I had a privileged childhood. My father was a hard-working man. He was in business for himself. He built residential properties and he had a company that did so. And by strange coincidence, although it's not my house, I'm actually sat in a house that was built by my father's company right now. So that's a strange quirk. I never thought of that. But there it is. As a consequence, we were never short of anything. And since we're at Christmas, it's easy to sort of reflect on those Christmases. We were spoilt to death as children, my sister and I. We never went short of anything, and my sister, who was 3.5 years, my junior, we shared the same holidays, we shared the same meals, we shared the same table, we patted the same dogs, we did all of those things. My parents always had a glass of wine with dinner. That was commonplace. But I never ever saw my mother or father having had excess, not even merry. My sister very, very rarely drinks. I'm the only alcoholic, and I don't know how that happened. And really, I've come to the conclusion now, that it really doesn't matter how it happened. That was part of the step one process. That was part of that process of realizing that, I am what I am. Accept it and do something about it. And yeah, so I guess I took my first drink at about 12 or 13 years old. My mum and dad, my dad was in various confederations. He was a part of a builders community, and they would have dinner dances, etc., etc. My dad was quite sociable. We lived in a house that would accommodate quite a few people, and so prior to any functions, it was quite common that my dad and mum would invite people around to the house, and they would have pre-dinner drinks. Any excuse to have a bit of a social, my father was always up for it. I used to wander around the house after everybody had got on whatever mode of transport it was, whether it was a coach or cars or a minibus. And as with all these occasions, there was always people with half a glass left. Oh, come on, the bus is going, and so you'd walk around the room and you'd find half empty or half full, depending on which way you look at it, glasses. And I would wander around, and it was good hunting, really. I would have a drink of this and a drink of that. And by the time that they came home, I would have all the glasses washed. They would be back in the cabinet again. they would walk back into a relatively clear room, really, not realizing that I've tried this particular potion or that particular potion. And by the time you added them all together, I was drinking cocktails of some very, very rare natures, but that was at most mischief. It wasn't anything other. It was what kids do, and that was the way it was. But when I went to university, when I left home, I went to university, and I was only just 18, and the gloves were off then. There was no parental control. It was, out with the lads, out with, hitting the town, etc., etc. And it's then when I reflect back, because I've done a lot of reflecting back, I tend to understand things better by looking back at them. I've never understood or planned things going forward particularly well. And because I've been made to sort of look at my history, made to look at the way that my behaviour was, I look back and it was ready right at the word go. As soon as I was away from home, I was drinking uncontrollably. I'm from 18 to 68 years old when I finally fell into a treatment centre, at which Young is one of the lecturers and counsellors. All that time, all I've ever done is drink recklessly without any ability to stop whatsoever. Once I'd taken that first drink, everything was off until I'd even done several things. I'd run out of money. I'd run out of companionship, which was often the case. Because when a person drinks like I was drinking, people tend to drop off the social scene very quickly, and I was discovering that these friends were friends to a point until my behaviours became intolerable to them. And I wasn't drinking necessarily with prudish people. It was just that normal people wouldn't cope or contend with the way that I behaved when I was drinking. I've ended up in hospitals one Christmas, I remember going back, the bruise was nicely coming down my face on Christmas Day. That injury to the head and the bruise that was created was nicely coming down my face on Christmas Day. And when I sat back at home and my mum had prepared Christmas dinner and all the family were around, I couldn't see what I was eating because the bruise had now closed my eyes. And that was as a result of a Christmas party at university. And, the disapproval, I can tell you, was quite a long, long, long time ago, but I can feel that disapproval even now. That's how much and what my family thought of me at the time. But it never made me alter. I was incapable of altering. My drinking has taken me into 3 marriages and back out of them again. I have 2 sons by my first marriage. My drinking behaviours have cut ties with them for now, insomuch as we don't have communication, which is very hard at this time of year. I've got 5 grandchildren, so that close family to me is something that is still alienated at this moment in time from me. But that's part of the later story. 3 marriages, 2 visits into hospital. The first visit into hospital was in 2012 rather. And I'd actually fallen in a drunken haze. And what I'd actually done was, when I woke up the following morning without the anaesthetic of alcohol, I realised I'd done something quite serious to myself, and I'd shattered my shoulder. I'd fallen on my left shoulder, and it had virtually disintegrated. So I was in hospital for that. As the foremost form of treatment and the reason for being there, very quickly it became apparent to those that were about to treat my shoulder that the first importance was to get me detoxed, because that was the thing that took over. That was the thing that was really threatening my life. And I was in intensive care as a result of my drinking. Fast forward from that to 2023. I fell over again. I wasn't capable of standing up this particular day. I called an ambulance, and once again I was taken into hospital for a second time. Now, you'd think for somebody who has a relatively reasonable level of intelligence, one of those experiences would have been sufficient to have made me think, especially after being treated. I came out of the first situation, and one of my sons turned around and said, look, I'm not having my children see their grandfather the way that I've seen my father. You either sort it out or you've lost us. And I sorted it out. That emotional frothy appeal that we read about actually did something. It actually did some good to begin with. It actually did some good for 6 years. 6 years and 3 months. And I was on holiday one August, and I was with my third wife by this time, and she was drinking a glass of white wine, and the condensation was going down the outside of the glass, and it was a hot, humid day, and just as things were right. And I decided, before I even opened my mouth, that I was going to have one of those. That was it. The decision was made, and I was ordering one, explaining to the wife, who was wearing this now horrified look on her face, that, do you think that's a good idea? It didn't matter what she said, really. I'd decided, and that was it. And fast forward again to, that was 6 years of sobriety, so 2018. It took me a shorter period of time to get back into hospital again, but this time things were there. Things were broken to the point where there became no return. I was in hospital in the town where the treatment centre is. By sheer coincidence and by sheer luck, and I look at it now as God actually finally getting involved in the situation, because I was led to a place that I wouldn't ordinarily have been taken to by the ambulance. Notwithstanding that, I still had to go through the treatment, and once again, against some odds, I came through the treatment, and it was clear that I was going to survive this experience. But none of the family would have me. My mother, by this time, she's still alive. She's 93, as I'm 71 next week. She's 93 at the end of the same week. It would have been unthinkable for her to have accommodated me, because I was too much of a handful. My sister wouldn't have me. My sons had already written me off. And at that point where there was just nowhere to go. I had nothing. There was nothing. There was nowhere. This was essentially the bottom of the fall. There was nowhere else for me to fall, apart from the fact that the family had muddled together and found this treatment centre. And with the backdrop of that story, I was walking in up the steps of this treatment centre, thinking that this was even worse. So intensive care, no one would have me. But what has happened to my life now? I'm in a treatment centre. God alone knows. I mean, the stupidity of the logic behind it all. When I thought that things couldn't get any worse, I thought the treatment centre was that worst step. So there I was, at the hands and the mercy of whatever anybody threw at me. I'd heard of AA. I'd heard of AA and its potential for recovery. It was something that I'd never considered seriously, even though it had been part of previous conversations, because I didn't want to stop drinking. I couldn't imagine what life would be like without a drink. It just seemed inconceivable. And yet, here I was, facing that very real prospect, and I really didn't want it. Regardless of where it had taken me, I really didn't want it. And, you know, I fell into the disciplines of a treatment centre. I fell into the disciplines of what was expected of me. And I had to go with the flow because I had no alternative. And that's the truth of the story. You know, if I had an alternative, if I had have had the legs on that day that I was taken to hospital for the second time, I would have walked and bought some more alcohol. That's the truth of it. I was brought to my knees and brought to a place of recovery without even really realising it. But what I see now, looking back, is I was brought there by a power greater than myself. Everything was aligned at that point to give me the best opportunity when the chips were down, when I really needed it. I was given the right place at the right time. And I was surrounded by what turned out to be the right people. I'm going to give a shout out to the guy I've seen some of the pictures. The young is enjoying the post-Christmas period with his children, and there's some beautiful pictures of him walking down the beach with his daughter, looking at grey seals and everything. And I'm going to give a shout out to that guy because at the end of the day, you know, I was in this treatment centre. I'm now of the understanding. I didn't even know of the big book. I didn't know of any 12 steps. I knew nothing of this. And I'm in this room, and Jung was lecturing, and he would know because he has stories of his own, and as time passed, I became to know his story, he became to know my story, but there was one occasion, and I'm thinking in this treatment centre, I need to have a spiritual experience. What happens if I don't get one? I'm doing this alcoholism thing again. Well, you know, where am I going to find this spiritual experience from? What format does it take? You know, do I have to have the Bill experience where the wind is blowing through the bedroom, or do I, you know, what happens if I don't get this? You know, I'm into worried because, again, retrospectively looking back, that pivotal moment, that spiritual experience, that belief that something higher than me, something that I didn't understand, and I don't confess to even understand now, that pivotal moment when Jung picked up the 12-step, the big book, and said, there is a solution. There is a solution. Follow the solution. This book contains everything. Rarely have we seen anybody fail, you know, all of those things. But the way he said it, the enthusiasm that came with it, the fact that I was broken enough at that time, perhaps, you know, you could say all sorts of romantic things, perhaps the sunlight glinting on the whiteboard or whatever. It wasn't like that. It was that moment when Jung said, there's a solution and it's here. And all you have to do is listen and follow. I knew instantly I believed him. I believed him. That's all I needed. That belief that something was there to hang on to give me hope that had actually never existed in my life previously. I can't tell you the relief and the ton weight that came off my shoulders. We can go through all those analogies, but they were all true. I knew instantly then that I was in a place I needed to be. I knew also that I needed to shut up and listen, which I was never very good at. And, and I wasn't the perfect client within there either, because, I was having to be told to keep my opinions to myself and to shut up because, I've dragged myself in there at 68 years old. I've got quite an attitude, and I've walked in there, but it became evident that I had to shut up and listen, and that's what I did. And it turned everything around for me. I became a sponge. I became a sponge. Later I understand it. I've become a seeker. I've become a seeker for something that will bring me now eventually, after all this time, 20 minutes or so, 25 minutes, back to the reading. I've become a seeker of something that is absolutely immense. It's absolutely immense. The promises that are in the book, the promises that will be read later on, the 9th step, 10th step promises, every promise in the book that it's promised, every lesson that I attended has all come true. It's all coming true. And that's quite amazing. When I was in there, step one, I've already mentioned my dad's a builder. My dad was a builder. I know very well that when you look at the houses, that they wouldn't be stood without the benefit of a strong foundation. It's the work that goes on that you can't see very often that is the important work. And what did John have to do? I had to get honesty. I couldn't go forward from this now line in the sand that was created in that lecture room. I had to go forward with honesty. How do I get honesty? I do a step one and I make sure it's a solid step one. Because in the cold light of day when John sat on the end of John's bed in a treatment centre and I need to get hold of this, there's no messing around here. This is honest time. And in my heart of hearts, I know, I find it quite emotional. In my heart of hearts, I know very well that the honesty I had with myself in that moment, and myself and God in that moment, was something that I cherish to this day. It's something that I've never actually done with myself before. The need to become honest. And I might talk a load of rubbish. You might be listening to this wishing Marty had really turned up, but at the end of the day, what you're hearing is something that's coming from the heart and it's honest. Step two, come to believe. Well, I heard someone say, on one of the shares previously, and I have a mind who it is, but I won't mention it. It was a lady on this meeting, and she said, I was very good at making gutter prayers. Prayers from the gutter. I was very good at when all bets were off and I was heading towards a disaster, I could find the ability to pray then. So now, having got honest with myself, am I going to now drag this belief that, I'm not heading to the gutter at this moment in time. I'm trying to rescue myself here. I'm trying to rescue myself. So am I going to now believe that I can make that prayer that previously I've just reserved for situations of complete disaster? Can I now build a relationship up with a higher power? Can I go to God? And I remember when my dad was dying, I prayed that God would take him because, at the end of the day, that for me was a moment of complete despair. But what I didn't realize was I was praying for the benefit of somebody else, and that makes sense now. And that prayer came true for me because I was asking for something that wasn't of my benefit. My dad wouldn't have wanted to live the way that he was living towards the end of his days. And I prayed that God would take him. And it happened. And I was thankful, Now, with that experience, is it therefore difficult for me to realize that God can do that for me now? As long as, So step 2, and the decision to hand over, crikey, the decision to sort of turn my will and my life over to God. Absolutely. Because God, you find me in a place of absolute desperation. But I'm finding, before I'm having this conversation with you, I've actually found honesty in my own heart, So step 3 kind of came and went. Step 4, great trepidation, because I kind of knew where this was leading. I kind of knew that this wasn't going to be comfortable. And so I was making sort of an inventory of everything that went of my life and the moral inventory, etc. And don't forget, I was in a community, like a recovery community, and people had gone through step 5s. People had experience of step 5s. We were talking to each other within the common areas. And step 5s, to a lot of people, was like a weight lifted off one's shoulders. This is what I was hearing. Step 5 was anything but that for me. Step 5 was a stark realization of me looking in a mirror, unable now to blame anybody else for the predicaments that I had led myself to, because it became evident to me that all of this finger pointing was covering the obvious. And this is, I suppose, why I approached it with such trepidation. I was nearly sick to the pit of my stomach about the behaviours that I had been capable of and the blame that I was appointing to other quite innocent people. So, yeah, step 5, difficult. Step 6, 7, humbly ask him. Step 7 was like the activity of step 3. God, I've got to a point now. Let's nurture this relationship, but, I'm asking earnestly, please rid me of all these shortcomings. So allow me to be the kind of person that you expect me to be. Step 8. Yeah, the list. I mean, I don't have a massive family. I've got through a process of some amends. Not all amends have been made at this moment in time, even 3 years down the line almost. But, that's okay. It's going at a pace that it needs to go at for the benefit of other people as well. And I'm thinking specifically about my sons at this moment in time. At Christmas, I bought some vouchers for both my sons and their wives, and I thought I'm going to continue in the vein that I would continue if everything was on an even keel. The reason it's not on an even keel is perfectly obvious, but I'm going to continue. I'm not going to gift you. because it's that time of year. I'm going to gift you. And I went back home to pick up some bits and pieces, and I found the vouchers back through my door. The son had returned them. Dad, I don't feel inclined to accept these. Things aren't right, blah, blah, blah. And so the things aren't right. And it says in the amendment process, except when to do so would hurt them or others. And, if I went to try and force an amend, it would have, I'm sure, the adverse reaction to the one I wanted, So I've got to be patient. Something strikes me very, very hard, though. I've got to maintain what I'm doing, because the amends I'm making to my sister, to my mother, are, I could work for the rest of my life. Presumably, Mum's 93. She's not well. She's had pneumonia last year. She's failing. I won't have time to make any kind of volume of amends that lady needs. All I can do at this moment in time is conduct myself in a way that would, in my thought process, please God. In the way, be thoughtful, be kind, carry the 12-step principles in all my affairs every day. If I don't do that, what's the scenario? I'm never going to get an opportunity with the children and the grandchildren. I begin to feel that things are moving in a positive way. The very second I take my own will back, better off. I've got to conduct myself the way that I'm conducting myself now, going forward. So how did we get to that reading? I'm a different person to the one that came out of that room, that treatment centre now. When I walked out, my counsellor said to me, not young, but my counsellor said to me, you've only just scratched the surface here, John. And the scratch isn't very long and it's not very deep. And I didn't understand what he meant. And today I believe I do, because becoming a seeker, I mentioned it earlier, finding this spiritual ocean, for want of a better word, this spiritual plane in my life is something that I am very motivated and very given to exploring to the best of my ability. And how do I do that? My step 11 asks me to seek through prayer and meditation, a conscious, channel and a contact with God. Yeah, well, I'm finding that this is the very reward that I thought alcohol was giving me in the first place. This is giving me that reward. This source of such pleasure and warmth and gratitude and everything I've got for it. And how do I extend that knowledge? How do I extend that search? How do I know which roads to go down to find further knowledge, to find these things? I join meetings like this, and I listen to speakers, and I listen to people I can connect with, and I listen to what they're doing. And every now and again, somebody will drop a message to say, well, I read C.S. Lewis, Mere Christianity, and the first chapter. And so what do? I buy the book and I read it, and I understand where because, Mere Christianity was printed just prior to and also there's another one, The Spirituality of Imperfection was another one. And I was on this very platform when I heard that, and I don't know who said that, but I bought the book. And it makes sense. In fact, some of it, I think The Spirituality of Imperfection was actually in print prior to the big book. And I can see how some of the things could be true if one was, sought from to feed the other. I listen to people who I admire. I'm thinking, stick with the winners. You know, that man has something. That woman has something. You know, I was very, very trepidatious about coming on here and speaking this morning. And then a share from Brenda J last week just came ringing straight into my ears this morning. And I'm thinking, I'm worried. I'm nervous. I'm carrying this fear that very quickly would have had me hiding under a rock somewhere. And I'm thinking about Brenda J saying, just open your mouth and speak. And that's what she said last week. You know, just, you know, open your mouth and speak. And, sadly, if you did arrive here expecting Marty, and I hope sincerely everything's okay with Marty, and there are perfectly good reasons for him being out of contact today. And, you know, I look forward to listening to him on some other occasion. But, you know, it's been a joy. It's been a pleasure to share a little bit with you today. And, you know, it's my sincere hope that you receive something that you could want to hear today. Thank you to everybody being here, and I'll leave it there. Thank you.